Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at democratizing business data with AI. I'm joined by Dr. Nate Nichols, VP of Product at Tableau. Nate, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for listening today.
So could you give us a quick introduction? Tell us a little bit about your background, and particularly around your experience with AI.
Yeah, for sure. So I joined Tableau about 2.5 years ago. Before then, I spent my whole career at a company called Narrative Science, which was a startup out of Chicago, came out of Northwestern, where I got my PhD, and then rolled right into Narrative Science. And at NS, it was all about doing data and analytics over data to produce natural language descriptions of what's going on, natural language insights. And so we were in that space for a long time. We were very early. This was all pre-OpenAI. This is pre-Transformers, pre-everything. So we did templates. We did these sort of complicated computational linguistics kind of approaches, a lot of different ways in that space. Right when I think we got acquired right before ChatGPT started coming onto the scene. So as we moved into Tableau and incorporated a lot of our technology and Tableau data stories that came straight from the Narrative Science acquisition, but also a lot of the thinking went into what we're Pulse, which I think we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah.
But so as we moved into Tableau, now my focus is on AI and in particular generative AI across Pulse and really across Tableau as a whole. And so I get to work a lot with engineers who are building cool stuff, and there's a lot of great capabilities that Salesforce gives us we're able to build on top of. Talking a lot with customers, working a lot with design, and trying to figure out how design and generative AI can work together, and sort of as all these paradigms are evolving and sort of being discovered very quickly, just because everything's moving super quickly in the space, as you know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and recently I was at a Tableau event, and I learned a lot about what you guys are doing, and obviously I've interviewed some folks from Salesforce already too, but I was really impressed with several things that I saw, and so I know we're going to get into a couple of these, but I guess a place to start is maybe just a bigger picture of how Salesforce Tableau is using AI to make data analysis more accessible. And not just for data scientists and analysts, but for end users as well. Give us a little idea, kind of a big picture of what that looks like.
Yeah. So, our mission at Tableau has always been to help everybody see and understand data. And that's obviously historically been a very sort of visual analytics. It's a super powerful tool built for people, and it can go as high as you can invest 10,000 hours in Tableau and still learn new things and still sort of be getting real value out of that. But the way that analytics sort of makes money and why people come back to us and renew their contracts, it's because they get some return on that investment, right? And the return is not just somebody looked at a workbook or a dashboard, or even somebody understood something new about that. The return really comes from when they do something with that information, right? So they have to learn something from the data, go off and make a better decision, take a better action, have a better conversation, build a better product, whatever it is. And that's how the whole process sort of works, right? And that's how it generates value for the business, is that return on the investment, those actions actually being taken. And that part of the problem has really been uncracked, I think, historically in BI. And Tableau, we invented self-service analytics 20 years ago. We've been in the space a long time. We got lots of great competitors and partners and customers, and there's people have been in that paradigm for a long time. And what we're doing for the analysts and the data scientists, the more technical folks, we've done a lot for them, and that's awesome, and we love them, and we'll continue to do a lot for them. But the group that we call business users, the people that are actually consuming that information and then doing something with it, that's the part we've taken runs at it with ask data, explain data. There's been people trying search style approaches. There's been different ways to try to get at those users. But I think it's fair to say that nothing is really stuck. And in general, customers, they don't see the engagement that they want from their business users, from their viewers, whatever you want to call it, because it's just not the right experience for them. Right. And we've tried, and others have tried to make the dashboard experience work for them, and it doesn't. And so what we're doing with Pulse, and Pulse is bigger than AI. It's an experience. It's a web app. It's part of the mobile app. It's got a bunch of deterministic insights. It's got a metrics layer. All this stuff that is not generative AI, and it's really about getting those individual the metrics that matter to a business user. Let's get it in front of them in a way they
Mhm.
can understand. Let's tell them useful, interesting things about it. Let's let them share it and collaborate around it. And that's all. I can do that without any Gen AI or anything else.
Right.
And that's all that stuff is really critical to Pulse. But now that there is also generative AI that we can start building on top of, we're able to do a lot more and push that a lot farther. So we have like auto gen summaries that just, hey, if you have 5 seconds to interact with data in your day, read these 3 sentences that were generated from you for you with some Gen AI, and it tells you about the metrics that matter most to you, how they're changing, why they're changing, and in some cases what you can do about it. And it's like, that's like really amazing to be able to give that to somebody, and we can only do that with generative AI. So just in general, we're really tackling that sort of that last mile of
Mhm.
the kind of analytics pipeline where it gets into people's heads. That's Pulse, and Pulse is able to do as much as it can. And we've got, we're really pumped about the next 6, 12, 18 months development we're doing on Pulse, because it's such a natural fit with Gen AI.
Yeah. Obviously dashboards, they're useful. People have moved there. That certainly better than having a report, but there are a lot of limitations around the edges. Like, if it's fine if I want to know the same thing every day, but if I see something that didn't look right, I want to get more. That is not so easy for a business user, right? And it seems like that's one of the big changes that I saw, was this opportunity to have natural conversations, so to speak, with the data. And I know some of what you guys have been doing is related to taking Einstein Copilot and building that into Tableau. So can we talk a little bit about that and about that idea of conversing with the data in maybe a little more natural way? And how does it help users formulate questions, guide them through the analysis process, that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah. So there's sort of what we're investing in Tableau today with AI. There's kind of two like buckets of AI
Mhm.
investments. The first is all around Pulse, which we just talked about.
Yep.
Again, for the business users. That second bucket is all under this Einstein Copilot for Tableau kind of umbrella term, and that's in the existing experiences and for our existing users, the data professionals, the analysts, the data stewards. How can we help? And there, it's really more about usually kind of optimizing their workflow. And so, you don't have to. Nobody wants to type in descriptions of their data sources, and in practice, very few people do. It's kind of, it's a ticket that never gets got to. Hey, we'll use Gen AI to generate really nice descriptions of your data, and humans always in control. You can tweak it if it gets it wrong, but in general, it's pretty good at that task. And all of a sudden, now your metadata is a lot richer, your data catalog's a lot richer. So we can do some of those kind of really kind of productivity and taking on these boring tasks.
Mm.
But I would say the kind of the lead character in the Einstein Copilot for Tableau story is around web authoring, which is generating visualizations in that conversational style you're saying. um, and there it's in the existing in the existing workbook experience, but you can do it all with language. And like, to give one just example of this, I was messing around with it, I think weekend before last. I live in Chicago. My kids go to Chicago public schools, and we had like a data dump of, here's all the Chicago public schools, and here's the rate at which they graduate students, and here's key features of them, and here's how big their classes are, and here's how long the principal tenure is, and sort of like, a bunch of good
Mhm.
public data about the schools. And we wanted to like dig into that and sort of compare our school against the others and see if we were at the right school, and those kinds of questions that parents are always anxiously
Yeah.
asking themselves. um, and I'm not, I work at Tableau. I don't know if I should say this. I'm not a Tableau expert, like, at all. I'm a quantitative guy. I used to program. Like, I get math, I get numbers, I get analytics. Tableau is, I just haven't had much experience in that core tool. And Einstein Copilot for Tableau is like amazing for it. So I bring it into Tableau, which is easy to get, as a CSV dump, so it's real quick to bring it in there. And right away, ECT, Einstein Copilot for Tableau, it suggested some questions that it could answer
Mm.
based on what I was saying there. And it's, which schools have the most students, which schools have the highest graduation rates, which neighborhoods have the lowest average class size. stuff that was all plausible. And I didn't know what I was looking for. It wasn't sort of like, I'm going to, dig and find this one insight. It's just kind of like, I want to understand the district better. And I have data that seems like it should help, but that was kind of what I went in with. So the recommended questions were super helpful. You click on it and right away you get a nice visualization.
Mm.
And one of the things that I really liked about it is that everything it does, you see it do it in the UX. So like if it makes a bar chart for you, you see the measure and the dimension that was dragged out. If it applying a filter, because you say, just in Andersonville where I live, you see that filter get applied. And so one, it's great because you can see what it's doing. It's not, hey, the super smart AI did a bunch of magic and came back to you with the answer. Trust us, we got it. It's like, no, we'll show you all the work, which is really powerful. And it's also nice because it teaches you to use the tool. Like after I did some of these, it's like, oh, I know how to do this. I'll just drag it. I didn't need Einstein for some of the simpler ones because it had taught me how to use it. So those are the kinds of like things we're getting into. We're doing a lot more with conversation. It's really nice that it has the context of it. So you can just say, what about Andersonville? You don't have to restate the whole query now with new context applied because it knows all that work. If you do stuff in the traditional UX, Einstein knows about it. So if you like apply a filter, you can remove that filter over here. It's like they're pulling from the same, grounding or shared
Mm.
context there. But for me, that was like just a home run thing of like, man, Einstein Copilot for Tableau, it's like really great for this kind of work. And I think for the more experienced users, they'll appreciate that it can create calcs on the fly for them. I did that one to make is it a low tech school or not? By basically looking to
Mm.
see if how much they talked about Chromebooks or laptops in little description fields. If
Mm.
they didn't talk about that, I classified them as a low tech school, which is something we're interested in, blah, blah. But it did it all right there in that flow of work and that one experience. And so that was a really powerful ECT is great moment for me. And right now in sort of early July, it's in open beta. We're going to be GAing it this summer, and we're all just really excited to get customers' hands
Mm.
on it.
Yeah, I mean that's really powerful. And I was thinking as you were talking, I was just thinking of use cases for me. A lot of times I do surveys, pull the survey data in, and you're trying to build a story, and you don't really know, you don't know what the data is going to look like until the data's there. So, if it could help you walk through that sort of a scenario and go, hey, what about this? What about that? This seems unusual. I mean, all those kinds of things would be great to accelerate the workflow and really help you get to better information much more quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's part of our trajectory. And I think part of the trajectory with like, sort of co-pilots or agents or however that shakes out, where today a lot of those they're including ours are like reactive. Like it sits there, it suggests questions, which we're excited about, and we want to do more of those kinds of things. But in general, it's hey, if you have a question, you hit the little Einstein button, it pops up a tab,
Yeah.
you type in your question. That's a very sensible place to start, but it's not where we want it to. That's not going to be the end game, right? And so, where we're pushing it to be is much more of a consultative Copilot experience, where it feels more like we're also in the process, related to looking at schools. We're in the process of starting to look at buying a house.
Mm.
And it's like, man, a realtor is really powerful. And that's sort of like they really know their business. They know the neighborhoods they sell, N houses a year. Being able to like partner with them and
Mm.
I'm not just telling them neighborhoods to go look for. I'm not just giving them a budget. I'm telling them what their goals are and what's important to us and what how do we think about trade-offs.
Yeah.
And they give us like a really high level of service, right? We're personal financial advisors, personal chefs, all these kinds of things they really know a domain, they really care about solving for you, and they get to apply all their expertise. That's where we see this evolving to, and we're not
Mm.
there yet, and the technology isn't there yet, frankly. But I think it's going to get there very quickly, and so it sort of starts to become like an ideation partner, a
Mm.
collaboration partner, somebody you can kind of riff with and dive into a data set, and like that's I'm really amped about that kind of interaction pattern.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, even in some of the public tools that I used and do use for different parts of the research business, it's just nice to have something that you could go, hey, give me 8 questions for this kind of interview in a podcast. Now, it's not the end result, but it is a whole lot faster than me thinking of 8 things first and then
Yep.
jumping into it, right? So just little things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, or even even I need a good tagline for this type of business. It's doing this, it's doing, and just get like
Yeah.
10 iterations of something and you can go, yeah, it's not good. Oh, I can fix that. But it's having, a blank piece of paper versus having a list is, you know,
Yeah.
pretty good.
There's
Yeah.
this phrase I love that's like, it's easier to mark with a red pen than a black one. And it's like,
Mhm.
man, it is. And those things are really, LLM doesn't get bored, doesn't get care about cranking out 30 versions of the same thing for just for you to pick the one that sounds the best and then tweak it a little bit or whatever. It's a nice sort of dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer and blogger, I've done this for years, but I can't tell you the number of times before generative AI that I wrote the whole blog post and I sat there for an hour and a half trying to think of the first sentence. Like, I mean, because you want it catchy. I need it to be this. I want it that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and now I can get like 20 versions of that and then edit it and put. I mean, saves me a lot of time.
yeah, for sure.
So we've talked a little bit about Tableau Pulse and just kind of introduced the idea of it, but I wanted to dig into that a little bit more because that's like you said, there's sort of two halves of the end user experience. The Copilot, obviously, very useful, but then for Pulse, there's a lot of things that I saw that it could do, and I know one of the things you mentioned was this idea of a metrics layer. Can you tell me a little more about that and help us kind of understand how it helps organizations build this common language for data, ensure everybody's kind of working off the same information data, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. So I think historically when Tableau came out, it entered into a world where it was a very governed sort of world, and everything required a lot of you had to go through IT to get anything modeled, and was very top down and strict. Um, and one of the things I was really excited about Tableau is like I don't have to talk to those guys. I can just bring in my own CSV that I got from somewhere, and I don't need anybody's permission. I can go in and slice and dice and get useful things, and I can share it. And that's a lot of our go-to-market model was, hey, do that, and then buy 5 licenses, and then buy 10, and then we'll get into another team. That sort of land and expand model,
Yep.
which is great for a lot of in a lot of for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of strengths to that. A lot of our customers now are ending up in this place where they've got a ton of data sources. It's
Mhm.
very easy for some sub team in their organization to spin up another one. They've got a slightly different definition of revenue because there doesn't account for VAT pricing when the product is shipped from Europe, and just sort of all these nuances that can go into things.
Mhm.
And so it starts to become for particular for a business user, it isn't in there every day and doesn't know that Rev 2 final is the one you should look at, and Rev 2 final one is like terrible or whatever.
Right.
It's really hard for them to have any confidence of what they're looking at. And it's hard for the analytics teams to have confidence in what their folks are looking at. And there's been ways to address this in Tableau, and like published data sources is a big part of this. But in general, it can feel kind of wild westy. And
Mhm.
if an org doesn't want that, they have to invest a ton of time in governance, and then they kind of lose some of the
Mhm.
some of the advantages of the more kind of scrappier model. Or we're going with the metrics layer, and the metrics layer is building on a lot of this kind of semantics layery stuff we've been doing in Tableau. There's
Mhm.
also, we announced at Tableau conference in May that we're going to have big announcements coming soon about semantic layer that will in Dreamforce here in a couple months. So in general, semantic layer is just top of mind for us at all times. With the metrics layer sort of evolving into this bigger semantics layer.
Mhm.
But really, the idea there, or one of the big ones, is around having a single source of truth for what these things actually mean. And so
Mhm.
the idea of the metric is, hey, we're going to define once and for all how we calculate revenue, how we calculate churn, what counts as an enterprise company versus a mid-size, like all those kinds of things that
Mhm.
there's at least one definition for all of these somewhere in the business already, but there may be more than one. That one may not be widely spread. Like, let's do the work. And a lot of the work of building out the metrics layer is, it's not time in the UI. It's to create a new metric, is choose a measure and a time dimension off a data
Right.
source, and you're done. The harder part is getting everybody to agree on, hey, that's how we're actually going to calculate cost to serve, or whatever that is. um, and sort of having the business, and sort of forcing some of those business conversations around that, so that, hey, there is really going to be one of these. And that can be kind of painful for customers. And so we talk about ways of, hey, you probably want to start in one domain. It's not
Mhm.
like, go convert all your data sources, go build 10,000 metrics and get that
Right.
done this quarter. It's like, no, no, no. Like, find maybe the HR team, or there's some little team somewhere that, and a lot of them, companies, some companies have metrics layers today, like GBT is a big one. And there's others in that space. But a lot of people, they have things that are not strictly a metric, but it's like a metric, right? Everybody's got sort of, hey, you want to grow, we're going to have 1,500 new customers by the end of the year. Like that's a metric. New customer count is like an implicit metric. Um, and so really it's about sort of like building that in, getting that definition concrete into the system, and then giving that to the business users. And so now they can search across all the metrics, and if they find one called revenue, that's going to be the one you have, right? And they can
Mhm.
inspect it, they can see where the data source is coming from, they can see who built it, all that good stuff. But they're not going to find revenue and rev2 and rev final and old. There's going to be one of them, and the tool will help enforce some of that. It won't let you make two metrics called revenue. It will force you to have one. Some of that is also kind of just people and processes within the customer,
Mhm.
but it becomes I don't know. Sometimes like like things like yard sales, or sort of where it's like you go to a yard sale. There's going to be a bunch of stuff there. It's all used. It's some of it, or some of it may not really be used, but it's like kind of used. And it's just yard sales are cool, but it's like not a place you go to like buy with confidence, right? Because you just kind of don't know what
Right.
that is. And that's a lot of browsing data sources. It's like there's some good stuff in here. There's some test stuff. There's some old stuff. The guy who did it left. We don't know what it is. There's all that kind of stuff there. The
Mhm.
metrics layer is much more of like, I don't know, a Whole Foods or something, where it's like, hey, everything is like labeled. Everything is good. You may not. Some of these may not be relevant to you. Like you don't have to be interested in everything in here, but you can trust it, and you know where it's coming from, and it'll tell you who made it and when it was last updated, and if there's any problems on the data source. And like it just becomes a lot more natural place to kind of look for things and trust the things you're seeing and share the right thing with people. And that's having that as a single source of truth in the metrics layer is, I
Mhm.
think, is part of is a really important part of Pulse, and sort of the way it's succeeding with business users.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was a little bit different example, but to me, this is kind of the same thing. I was interviewing some folks, founders of this design software company using generative AI for corporate design, and one of the things they did that I just loved was they built a brand module. So you basically set all your brand standards, and then once you set that, the rest of your team would have guardrails, boundaries, basically to say, okay, this is in standard, this is out, I can do this, and be able. And this sounds like the same kind of thing. Like they're, what does revenue mean? What does margin mean? What's gross margin mean? All those different things are not defined the same. Yet you want consistency as you're looking at your data and working together, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly that. I love that example, and it's exactly right. And it's like, just to kind of stay on that like analogy. They probably had like PDFs or Google Docs that laid out all the brand standards.
Mhm.
It wasn't in like a structured format. It
Mhm.
was in people's heads, and it was in some
Mhm.
unstructured format, which is where a lot of the business context and semantics about today is analysts know it, but it's not kind of written down anywhere.
All right.
Once it gets put in a structured way, and that in that style guide that the startup is doing, or in the semantic layer, all of a sudden it's really concrete. We can force alignment around it, and it's also an awesome repository for the AI to be pulling from. It's like really concrete grounding and context for the AI. It's like it's a really powerful model, and it sounds exactly like what they're doing.
Yeah, that's it. And I can immediately see the value in this. The same thing. I could see how this really does help teams collaborate and have the same kind of common language around different data, different metrics that they have to track. And you know, as a CFO, I mean that would be great if you could define some of those top level metrics that often are quoted, but maybe you want to make sure they're consistent. So I'm curious then, because this does seem like this really would help collaboration among teams and really kind of streamline decision making. And this is actually something I'm really interested in, is this idea of decision intelligence. And so this plays into that, I think. So I mean, is that true? Does it help teams make better, more consistent decisions?
Yeah. So there's a big emphasis on like sharing the insights in Pulse in particular, where it's like, hey, you just learned something new, because lots of times people go to, everybody wants like actionable insights. It's easy to say actionable insights and customers all nod. And it's like, yeah, we want those. And lots of times I think people imagine those as like it hits an API. We get an insight about inventory running low, and there's a button that says order more shoes, and you hit it, and an API hit, and like
Yeah.
there's sometimes where it's like absolutely that's like totally a thing, and we should just give you a juicy button that says do the thing that fixes the insight, and it's like that's great. And lots of times though, it's not just an API hit. It's like, hey, we need to have a conversation. We need to add this to the next agenda when we talk on the team. What are we going to do about SMBs, attriting, or like whatever that thing is?
Right.
You want to work on it, but it's not an API hit. It's about like collaboration. And so
Mm.
we have a big emphasis on that in Pulse. Obviously, we're part of Salesforce. We own Slack, so we're starting with Slack
Mm.
there. But we also just, I think at TC we announced the Tableau and Teams app and integration and partnership we have with Microsoft. So the things we're doing with Slack will also come to Teams.
Mm.
But yeah, that today we're doing things where you can like share to, you can share to channels, you can share metrics to in DMs. You can subscribe channels to get automatically updated on specific metrics on like a regular cadence. One of the things that we're not there yet, but we're excited about is thinking on as sort of we talked about conversational analytics
Mhm.
earlier, and as that keeps advancing, we start to think about like, hey, maybe Pulse is like a bot that's hanging out in rooms, and maybe it's in all the rooms, and
Yeah.
most of the time it doesn't say anything, but if you start talking about some stuff where some data would be useful, it's going to like chime in with some stuff, and you can shut it up. We'll make
Mhm.
sure has to make sure it's not annoying and stuff. But that kind of thing that's like, kind of a fly on the wall, like a virtual analyst kind of a thing that's there. And again, you don't have to ping it directly. You don't have to go, I'll go to Pulse and ask this particular question. It's just in the flow of work and really like in the flow of conversation, it's able to bring insights to that,
Mm.
make recommend things, and kind of get back to that riffing mode. That's like really, I think that's super powerful.
Mhm.
And especially, on the decision intelligence, one of the areas we're not really talking about is um, sort of some more support for like hypotheticals or how things could go differently in the future.
Mhm.
Is an area we're investing on. Sort of, not it's not really generative AI, but it's sort of it's within that AI space. Um, and so I think that the idea of like being able to say like, well, what if we did this to that partner and it comes back with analytical answers and
Yep.
can tell you what assumptions it used and stuff. It's like that's killer, man, and
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's what we're not there yet. Again, the tech isn't there yet either, but
Mm.
the road, the path there, we can see the path there.
Yeah, I just interviewed last week the CEO of a decision intelligence company, and we spent a little time talking about simulation, synthetic organization, digital twins. Some of the ways that you could actually go, hey, what if I did this? How would the customer react, or how would the prospect react, or whatever? That seems like that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's super. All that stuff. There's so much cool stuff happening now in this space. But yeah, that sounds.
I know.
I think it's very powerful.
So all good stuff and obviously really interesting, but there's also kind of the other side of the coin. And I know a lot of times in conversations this comes up around, you know, my business data. How does that how do you protect that? And I obviously have looked at a lot of the different ways that Salesforce platform can do that. But I'm curious, how do you guys tie into Einstein Trust Layer? How do you ensure privacy, security, within these AI powered tools?
Yeah. So everything that the kind of the spiel I like to tell customers is, we're really excited about Gen AI. Innovation is our number three priority or number three value at Salesforce and at Tableau, but trust is our number one priority. And so that's really what we solve for that first, which is totally true. So everything that we do, everything that anybody at Salesforce, broadly defined is doing always goes through that trust layer. Um, and there's a couple of things that are important about it. One, I think the probably the biggest one is that the overall approach we're taking at Salesforce is we're not married to any one language model provider.
Mm.
So, OpenAI is probably leading now. I'm starting to use Claude a lot more. Anthropic is great.
Yep.
There's tons of open source models, Llama and others. It's a super just fast developing space. And if you if you line up the timeline of the internet to generative AI, we're like not to the part where Google has come out yet, right? It's
Yeah.
very early days. OpenAI may end up being the Google, or they may end up being the Lycos or Ask Jeeves. And so we're keeping our options open, right? And we're also doing a lot of work internally. Salesforce Research did a lot of the initial LLM foundational work, and so we got a lot of expertise there. And we're looking to fine tune our own models and domain specific models. We've got a code gen model that works really well. So there's a lot of different options
Mhm.
that we have for different providers we can use, but everything goes adheres to this zero retention policy. And so in Pulse and Einstein Copilot for Tableau, we're using OpenAI 3.5 and 4, but we had, because of the zero retention policy, because it's going through the trust layer. There's no training certainly that happens off of the customer's prompts, and there's no the requests and the responses aren't stored on OpenAI's servers at all. So
Mhm.
they couldn't train off it if they wanted to. We've had our security teams test this and everything. So it's a purely stateless interaction from on their part.
Mhm.
Nothing is even logged, right? Or maybe the count of the tokens is logged or whatever, but the content isn't. So that's really important for us, and it's great because we, as developers at Tableau, we get to look at our individual use cases and say, okay, in this one, OpenAI is the best, and 3.5 is the right mix of performance and
Mhm.
latency. And so we can do that. And what there's other one we use for, if there's other one we're going to use Claude, whatever that is, we can make those decisions on a case by case basis.
Mhm.
But the customer knows that it's never going to be stored outside of Salesforce's trust boundary, which is Tableau Cloud's trust boundary, and definitely nothing is going to be trained off of. So I think that's the really key part of the trust layer. And we've obviously got security white papers that will tell you what encryption, how many bits, and all that kind of stuff for the real version of this conversation. And there's other stuff we're doing too that is kind of boring but important work around, like, hey, we're doing toxicity detection, and we're doing that
Mhm.
in a lot of different languages, and doing prompt hijacking defenses so people can't try to like break out of it and escape the prompt. And we also mask PII, so that never even leaves Salesforce servers at all. Names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers will all get replaced with variables and then unmasked on the way back out. um, so it's a really that trust layer, the zero retention policy, that's been a successful conversation
Mhm.
in general with customers. That when we started piloting in October of 23, I think September, October, and for a lot of customers, we were their first vendor bringing in Gen AI, and so they're like, we're trying to figure out what our process is. In the meantime, please go through it. And it's like, okay, we were all
Yeah.
kind of figuring it out together. But those conversations went well generally, and so it was validating. That was like, the approach that Salesforce is taking, that we're able to draft off of and build on top of. It's been a successful one in general with customers, and we have a lot of these conversations, and in general they go well, and people are they get allowed to turn on Pulse or Copilot and some of that good stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's been my experience with the Salesforce story so far. I think it does really resonate and make a lot of sense. One of the things that Salesforce has done, and you guys are obviously taking advantage of this, is this idea of supporting all the language, or most of the, popular language models anyway, because they are significantly different. And also I noticed they're significantly different week to week sometimes because
Yes, our engineers are
they
very frustrated
change.
about that.
I'm sure they are actually, but I know one of the things that Salesforce just announced too was this idea of benchmarks and publishing benchmarks of the
Mhm.
different language models. That seems like a really useful tool in this conversation too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a great blog post and interactive Tableau dashboard that Salesforce just put out. We're excited to do. I probably should just talk about that, but yes, the benchmark thing is really exciting. And like you're saying, all it's changing very quickly, and it's also improving really quickly. Like, so sometimes you can feel like, I think 4.0 is not as good as it was a week ago, and and
Yeah,
you sort of see chatter
yeah,
about that. But it's definitely better than 4 was, and it's definitely better than 3.5 was. And the new Claude is way better than the previous Claude. And like, so that's a thing to just sort of, I think it's important to keep in mind, where there's always, at any point in time, you can find things to poke at. And like, it used to be like how many fingers they would have in image generation, and like, but those things get solved pretty quickly. And so I talked to a lot of customers about sort of Gen AI broadly, and I think one of the things that's important to understand, I think most people aren't comfortable with what Gen AI is going to mean for their business, and which I'm not. Like, I think that's the correct thing because it's too new, it's too uncertain. But if you're not comfortable now, like, you will never be comfortable. Like, it's not gonna. The internet, we kind of got a handle on the internet. You know, it was a big deal, and then now we know kind of how the internet works. And then streaming was a big deal, but we kind of know how streaming works. I don't know if we're ever going to know how
Mhm.
AI works. I think it's moving too quickly. I think it's going to keep moving too quickly, and it's going to be this kind of tiger by the tail scenario that we're in now. And so, again, we're leading with trust. That's one of our differentiators. It's part of our
Yeah.
story and our DNA, and I think that's really important. Um, but it's not going to settle down. This isn't a thing we can wait it out and come in a couple years after it's all sorted itself out. It's like it's not going to do that. It really is it's a journey that everybody needs to be on together and sort of have that. I think have that mindset.
Yeah, that I think that makes a lot of sense, and I know, when companies ask me like, "Oh, well, when should I get in?" I go like, "Well, last year, like you should, you need to be
Yeah,
involved."
yeah.
Because it really is one of those things, like, simple things, like, I have a few prompts that I use every week to build this newsletter I put out every week, and what I've learned is that the same prompt week to week in each of the language models doesn't necessarily produce the same result. Like, you have to change the prompt, or you have to change the LLM, and it's, it can be a little frustrating, but at the same time, it does speak to the fact that the that everything is evolving so quickly that you have to have a handle on kind of how this goes together and what it does, so that you can then adapt as it does evolve,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're exactly right. Like, the only way to start to get that handle is get in there and get your feet wet. Like, it's gonna, yeah, you got to get started.
Yeah. Well, so we're talking a little bit about like future stuff, but I'd love to to look into your crystal ball a little bit and see what do you see from an AI perspective, and how it's going to evolve to empower, users with business data.
Yeah, I touched on a little bit with that, the idea of the consultative copilot, and that kind of, I think there's going to be a lot of interactions where you're like, hey, yeah, I'm a business user, and I've got a lot of, I'm having a hard time hiring AI folks, and that's a thing I want to like improve. And
Mhm.
you kind of come in with that as like a high level goal, and you're talking to something, and just like you go into a realtor and say, hey, and
Mhm.
you kind of roughly a 4-bedroom house, and these are the neighborhoods I'm looking at, that same kind of thing. And then the AI is able to, sit down with you and take you through that. And it's this funny, you're going to be in control, right? You're going to be the one who's accountable for it as the actual individual. You're the one that you can override. You can always override it. You can see what
Mhm.
it's doing. You can ask it. You can challenge it. You can just say, no, I know you think X, but I'm just telling you it's Y. Like, humans need to be the one that, the ultimate arbiters. And we use humans at the helm as a lot, as kind of a term we're using internally. That'll be the case. But there's lots of times where it's like the AI would be just super useful and be able to kind of walk you through this and talk to you
Mhm.
about your options, and like really kind of work with you. And I think that's an experience I see coming for sure.
Mhm.
And I think, similar to what we talked about with like the designers, or that
Mhm.
design, the design brief or the semantic layer. I think that's another pattern we'll see, where there's a lot of kind of loose information in experts' heads today, and they directly use that information to serve the users. It's like a designer, they've internalized what the brand guideline is. Somebody comes in and asks for a particular, full page spread. They serve that their internal user, and they do that with like their soft knowledge about what the brand guide is. And that works in a lot of cases, but it doesn't scale. The way you scale that is by just getting more people, right? And we've got a lot more, more analysts, more designers, more whatever it is. And that's just a hard model to scale. We end up with,
Right.
30% of the people think they use data on a daily basis or weekly basis. And it's like, what about the other 70%? We're not going to go hire 3 times more analysts to serve them. We got to come up with a more scalable way.
Right.
And so I think that kind of pattern of, as an expert, instead of directly serving your human user, you're going to instead help contribute to this body of knowledge.
Mm.
And then we're going to be able to scale that body of knowledge, that context, that grounding, that semantics, that whatever you want to call it. And then AI is going to be able to sit on top of that and sort of infinitely scale out to the users. I think that's a model that we'll see in a lot of different places. The designer is one, and data analyst is one. I'm sure in education there'll be kind of similar patterns where some people who are teachers today will sort of, I don't know, be teaching an AI or giving curricular context to it or whatever that is, to a thing that can more scalably reach students. That kind of pattern, I think, will start showing up in a lot of different places. And I think that, I don't know, yeah, and I think analytics is absolutely one of them, but I think that'll be a reoccurring thing that we see, really across knowledge work or some very big canvas over the next 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, even just the idea that it has the context of who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, and over time learns more and more about what you do. That's really powerful. And to me, that's a bright sort of spot to think about how we could see this move in the future. So yeah, that's exciting. Well,
Yeah.
Nate, that's all the time we have today. I could keep going definitely, but we'd probably lose the audience at some point. Um, before you go, though, I love to ask at the end of the show. I always ask, like, could you recommend someone like a thought leader, an author, somebody that you think would be influential that could help the audience as they, navigate some of these different issues?
Um, yeah, I have two recommendations for you. Like,
Nice.
the one, both of them are sort of, I would say more about Gen AI than within analytics in particular, but
Mhm.
they're both. I don't know. I think they're both good sources. One is the Lex Fridman podcast. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. He's just like weirdly monotone guy, but he interviews all these he interviews a lot of people, but a lot of them are like different takes on generative AI and what's going on there.
Mm.
Really smart folks, and he's a smart guy and sort of I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. It's like on my thing. I should do more of listening to podcasts. They always get recommended to me, and I never do anything with them. But I listened to Lex Fridman one, and it's a nice, it's a good sort of overview on like where that's going, and particularly when you think kind of Gen AI, bigger picture, and like we were talking about. I've got 3 young kids at home, and I'm like, that world they're going to be my age in is going to be crazy, and
Oh,
not like the world is
so good.
today. And I have no idea what it'll be, but that the Lex Fridman podcast is a nice, I don't know, sort of a good way to get my head in that space. And then the other one is maybe a little left field, but there's a fiction author named Ted Chiang, Chiang. He wrote the Arrival movie, or wrote the short story that got turned into that Arrival movie,
Mm.
with Amy Adams and like the cool octopus
Yeah.
aliens.
Yeah.
And he's a fiction writer with, I think he used to be a software developer, and he's got the kind of computational ideas, but he's such a clear thinker, and he thinks now, and now he's thinking a lot about Gen AI and what that means for creativity. He's got some couple pieces in the Atlantic, but his short stories and everything he writes is like very humanistic, but also written by a guy that really understands the tech side. And yeah, I think about his writings a lot, and they're on the fiction side. They're short stories, they're easy to read, and they're super interesting. So I recommend him in general any chance I get.
Great. Yeah. No, thanks. Two very, very good recommendations. So really appreciate that. So Nate, again, thank you so much for joining. Really interesting conversation, and I know the audience will really enjoy. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.